my first question for today is for sure related to the book you've written. Could you, in a few words, present what is customer development about?
So customer development, in my mind, is it's about learning what you need to execute on before just executing. So in the past, we sort of assume that what we believe between our ears is factual, and so we just go out and we execute on that, and we're sort of taught that a startup is a small version of a big company, and so we go out and we execute these processes. And in the sales and marketing world, we pull out activities from our toolkit. And then in the end, we actually learn that those don't necessarily work, and we're wasting a lot of time and money, and perhaps even failing. So going into what Steve Blank calls the startup death spiral, and so really customer development is about preventing that by asking your customers, learning from your customers, but also not only acting on what they say, but also figuring out what they'll actually do.
It's about asking your customers, trying to understand what they want, what are the problems. But do you have any tips or tricks for a young entrepreneur that has to go outside of the lab, outside of his company, as Steve Blank is mentioning a lot, just to meet the customers and to try to understand what are their needs?
Right. So the key is to focus on the word you're using, is the needs. So talking to your customers does not mean doing what your customer asks. Your customers, anybody that's interviewed customers as a product manager or as a project manager, and you're gathering requirements, we all know that the customer often doesn't know what all the range of possibilities are out there in the world. And so they don't understand how technology might enable them to do something newer or even better. So what we're really trying to figure out is not what the customer wants, but what the customer needs. Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying to focus in is on the problem, or on the other side, it may be their passion, right? In a consumer play, it's hard to describe some things in a problem. So you think about it in terms of the user's passion. And that's what we're trying to discover is, A, do they have that problem or passion, and how deep do they feel about that problem or passion? Most times when we're building solutions, we're asking the user to change behavior. And to change behavior is this really big, hard thing to do. Right. So no matter how great your idea is, and no matter how many features you can dream up, none of that matters, because you're trying to get these people to change their behavior, and they're only going to change their behavior if what they feel about their problem or their passion is really deep. And so the number one mistake I see entrepreneurs do is they lead with a question like, they say, I've got a great idea. What do you think about ABC? What do you think about my great idea? And of course the response they get is, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks. Go away. You're bothering me. So you can't lead with your solution. You can't lead with your great idea. Your job in customer development in the early stages, in the discovery phase, is to figure out, do people have this problem? And if they do, how deep do they feel about this problem?
Do you have any advice on how you should pick some of the best ideas your customers and users are mentioning to you?
Right. So the key thing is, and I think this is one of the most difficult things for entrepreneurs to grasp, the key comes down to market segmentation. And I think people are taught market segmentation wrong, and it's very difficult for them to grasp what segmentation is. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where the answer lies. So market segments are people that share the same problem and speak the same language. And by speak the same language, I mean that if you and I, Fred, we share the same problem, you actually might not look to me for a solution. You say, no, Brant's there in San Diego, I'm in Belgium, Brant's 20 years older than I am, and I don't know if this is true, I'm making this up, but there's a number of factors that might make you think, yeah, we share the same problem, but I'm not going to look to Brant for the solution. And that means you don't speak the same language. So a CIO, the chief information officer of a Fortune 100 company, and an IT manager for a middle-sized business, they might have the same problem, but they're not going to look to each other to solve that problem. the benefits that they're looking for are different. The type of solution they're looking for might be different. And so these are clues that they're in different segments. So again, some of the clues are you would have to market to them differently. If you have to market to two individuals differently, they're in a different segment. They'll be looking for different benefits, or they're looking for different types of solution, they're in different segments. Or even the depth of what they feel about the problem is different, they're in different segments. And so I counsel entrepreneurs to hyper sub-segment. Try to find a really super narrow focused segment. Create as many buckets as you can, and really that's actually how you can size your market, right? If you have very few hyper sub-segmented buckets, then maybe your opportunity is not that large, and maybe then you're going to look for a different opportunity, or maybe that's fine. Maybe that's what maybe you're satisfied with that. But what you want to do is find these different sub-segments, and then when you go and you interview your customers, you make sure that you put their answers inside of these buckets, and you start getting this picture that if I go after young professional moms who don't have time to feed their family, I know that that's a distinct segment from recent college graduate females who are actually looking at their first job, but they don't have a family. So you'll start to figure out that these feature requests are falling into these different buckets. And now you're able to weigh, well, which segment should I be going after? And there's a number of variables that you can use to analyze your different segments. So who has budget? Who is easier to reach with marketing? Who actually has the pain the most severely? And if you start evaluating your segments based on these different criteria, well, then certain segments will emerge. And oh, by the way, you've got the features that they're asking for, and you understand that where they understand their solution, and now you know that this is maybe what you should be working on. And so it's being driven by your opportunity and by the depth of pain and by the fact that you think that that's the right segment to go after, rather than just looking at a list of possible features.
So going outside, trying to understand their needs, then trying to segment your market in a different way that we are used to. It's more about trying to see which people have the same needs, have the same kind of problems, and then see if you have a base that is large enough to try to work on that segment instead of another one.
Your one bucket doesn't necessarily have to be a huge bucket if what you can see is that there's a number of buckets that I'll be able to go after over time. But having a nice defined bucket allows you to test that market so completely that you're actually going to get either a very strong signal to move on, or you're going to get a very strong signal that, yeah, at least I've got an opportunity with this bucket. And so then in sort of classic Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm terms, is that if you have maybe the right bucket, then you've got the bowling pin strategy, right? That if you knock down that bucket, you start to wobble the pins that are contingent to that first bowling pin bucket, and then maybe that gives you momentum going into the next segments. And that's sort of the ideal scenario. But it also could be that you've chosen the wrong segment, and there just isn't that traction. And then what you can decide is, as Eric says in his book, one of the types of pivots you can do is a market segment pivot. So then you can decide, well, are some of these other segments that I've already defined better segments? Or do I want to stick, did I learn something from this existing segment that's not right for my current solution? Can I change my solution to actually figure out something that's in this segment that I can go after? So it just allows you to more clearly identify whether to pivot or persevere, or whether to completely change your plans.
Okay, great. And you were just talking about Eric Ries's approach, so the lean startup, and you were mentioning in the beginning of the interview that you were writing your next book about the subject. From your perspective, what are the main advantages about this approach, this lean startup approach, and why should people use it in their daily work?
Right. So the lean manufacturing, lean comes from lean manufacturing, right? So it doesn't mean cheap, and it doesn't mean skinny, and it doesn't mean small. And in lean manufacturing, you pretty much know the value that you're creating for a particular customer. Your customer is identified. In the Toyota example, right, you're building a car, so you know the value that you're providing for the customer. And what you're trying to do is identify all of the tasks that you do that add value. You're putting the car together versus the tasks that are non-value add, like, you know, forklifting a pallet of parts from one side of the warehouse to another. And so in lean manufacturing, in the lean way, you're trying to eliminate as many of the non-value added activities as possible and make as efficient as possible those that are value add. Well, so the lean startup concept is different in the sense that you actually don't know the value that you're creating, and you don't know for whom you're creating it. Those are just assumptions. And so what are the processes that we can actually go to learn what the value is and for whom? And so so I think that this is what brings together, you know, things like agile development and the pirate metrics that Dave McClure talks about, and customer development and lean UX. These are all processes or methods that you can use as long as what you're doing is keeping in mind that I'm trying to learn the value that we're creating and for whom. And after you discover the value, for example, if you use an MVP, and you've developed a product, minimal product, and it takes off, you get a hit, well, then you actually don't need to do MVP anymore. You get to add features in order to grow the number of users that you have and to make your users even more passionate. You don't do MVP in order to be a lean startup, right? You do MVP in order to learn what the value is that you're creating for a specific customer. And so I think that describing lean startup in this way, I see suddenly light bulbs going off, and I go, oh, I see that there really is no step-by-step approach. And I see that if it's lean for me to build a prototype, then that's the right first step to take. And so you can listen, I love the business model Canvas stuff and the lean Kansas stuff, and I love UX and I love customer development, but it's important to remember that you can waste time doing all of those things in the same way that you can waste time building features that nobody wants. And so the idea really is to combine these tools in the best way that you, the entrepreneur, can use in order to make sure you're not wasting time and money, that you're actually learning what it is that you're creating, the value that you're creating.
Something indeed that I'm seeing a lot is that people really like all those approaches and just try to use them again as a kind of theory. And I think that we are really missing the point of what Alex Osterwalder, Steve Blank, and all the people like you were trying to bring in with your books, with all those kind of approaches.
Right. You have to sort of separate the tool from the theory or from the practice itself. And so if the tool helps you, by all means use it. But remember that, you know, there was a group that I was mentoring in Silicon Valley, and they had 1 week or 2 weeks of, you know, great speakers coming in and talking to them and teaching them how to use the lean canvas and or the business model canvas. And so I'm thinking, well, here this group is going to have already been out of the building, and they're going to have discovered all of this, and I was really excited. And as I went around the room, you know, these teams were going like, oh, you know, we're really struggling with what to put in the activities box. And I'm all like, no. I go, no, Alex would be the first one to not, you know, to say, don't spend days trying to figure that out. Make a hypothesis and then get out there and test it, right? Right. So it's really, there's so many of the entrepreneurs, the mentality is to, no, I need to sit down and figure all this stuff out instead of, no, get out of the building, go learn this. So
just do it, or build to learn, as a lot of people are mentioning. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, so the other exciting thing that we're learning, I also kind of think it's funny that people in the tech community, we sort of pretend that we like to invent everything new, even though a lot of these things have existed elsewhere, right? So So, even in the Toyota way, right? The engineers go live the life of their customer in order to learn more about the value that they can create. And so, I think that I think with customer development and lean startups and a lot of these things, a lot of these methods aren't new. And Steve Blank would be the first to admit that he developed customer development theory based on his own practices, but also the practices of other successful entrepreneurs. And I talk to successful entrepreneurs all the time, and they say, oh yeah, we did this part of lean, and we did this part of customer development, and so that's all great, right? This is a new framework, and I think it's very helpful, and it gets entrepreneurs thinking down the right path. But part of what we're doing in the new book is talking to people outside of tech. And so it's really interesting to see that without ever calling these things lean startup or without calling things customer development or lean UX, these entrepreneurs are using methods that allow them to discover the value. I was talking to this new restaurateur the other day, and so instead of just going and opening a restaurant, they actually rent catering space inside of existing restaurants when those restaurants are off hours, and they experiment with their recipes until they nail their recipe. Then they'll go to a farmer's market. And so without ever having to open a restaurant, they can experiment further and start building a customer base at farmers markets before they ever even dream about opening the actual physical restaurant. And so to me, that's a classic MVP, right? Serving your food at a farmer's market is a minimum viable product for a restaurateur. So,
Right.
Just awesome examples outside of tech.
It's a great example. It's a great example. Okay, we talk a lot about customer development approach, lean startup, and all the kind of advices that are linked to those kind of tools. But do you have any other tips, tricks that you would like to share to a young entrepreneur that is willing to launch his startup?
So I really think the toughest thing, again, it kind of gets back to what we were talking about. The toughest thing is really for them to, believe in themselves, but be skeptical of their ideas. And so, you sort of have to have a mentality that you're willing to be wrong. And if you believe that in order to be successful, something inside your business model is going to change, right? We know this about all of the successful startups that we know and love. And so if you believe that, then figure out what's the most risky part of your business model, be willing to be wrong, and go test it. And I think that you can dive into all of these books and you can participate in all the community that discusses this, but if you sort of just buy into that core piece of advice, then you're pretty good to go. And the key is to own it, right? Make it part of yourself that I need to test, be willing to be wrong. Every time you sit there and you're at your keyboard and you're programming, you catch yourself when you say, oh, well, I know this to be true. I mean, I hear this all the time, right? Oh, well, I know that this is going to work. Every time you use the word I know, check yourself. That's the best advice I can get. Every time you catch yourself using the word I know, pause and think about it. Yeah.